Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Yehuda Kurtzer, President, Shalom Hartman Institute of North America.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tzipi, for your remarkable remarks, and thank you to our friends and leaders here at the JCC for this extraordinary gathering, for inviting us all here today and doing all the hard work of getting this off the ground, to Zach, to Sally, to Amitai, to Ronit, and to all of my fellow presenters and participants. We're thrilled to be part of this grand conversation. And I'm excited to be introducing and moderating this panel today together with two titans of Jewish and Israeli thought to help us really launch the conversation that will carry us through the major themes of this day. Zach and I have talked many times over the years that when it comes to Jewish peoplehood, the activity is oftentimes the outcome. And as we look around a room and see ideological diversity, political diversity, American Jews, Israeli Jews gathered to do this work, we can actually use this as a microcosm for what we want out of the Jewish people, which is the capacity to really talk more intelligently, sincerely, and substantively about the very issues that divide us. You know, one of the great myths of Jewish life is that we oftentimes face significant challenges, and we assume that we're looking at challenges that reflect a brokenness, that somehow everything worked and now everything is broken. That's why we as a Jewish people, for instance, we imagine a messianic age in the future which is based on a past that never existed. You do that math for a second. We have a myth about our past that it reflects something that was perfect, and then we feel that something that we're doing today is broken. But I want to suggest actually that a lot of what's going on in Jewish peoplehood today and the divides between us are reflective of deep and inherent paradoxes that are essential to what it means to be Jewish. I can identify at least four. We as a Jewish people believe that we are a bloodline into which you can convert. We as the Jewish people believe that we are on one hand a unified people, and at the same time we tell a story that at the origin of that people we were made up of different tribes with radically different ethnic and political and ideological instincts. We are a people that dream simultaneously of being apart from the nations of the world and deeply among them. And perhaps most powerfully for the challenge that we're grappling with today, American Jews and Israeli Jews, we are a people simultaneously drawn by the promise of return to the land of Israel and simultaneously defined through all of our history by wanderlust. See, the Jewish people are not the only people in the world who claim that we are a people connected to a particular land, but we are the people who invented and gave to the world the idea of diaspora. In the Roman Empire, there was not a place where the Roman army went where we can't find evidence of Jewish civilization. Ever since the Jewish people has been promised the land of Israel, we have also looked for alternatives. And that's true both from Genesis 12, when Abraham is called to the land of Israel, shows up, says this looks great, and by Genesis 12, verse 9, he leaves to go to Egypt. These are simultaneous stories in our tradition. It is the birth simultaneously of the attraction to land and simultaneously the attraction to alternatives to that land. Peoplehood is, in many ways, our great ambivalence as a people. The individuals in the Torah and the Tanakh who most clearly identify the Jewish people as a collective, even though we don't often do it about ourselves, tend to be our enemies. The first individual in the whole Bible who talks about the Jewish people as an Am is Pharaoh. He sees the collective of the Jewish people in ways that the Egyptian Jews don't. Or Haman, centuries later, who says about the Jewish people in the Purim story, this is an Am Echad, Mefuzar u'Meforad, one nation that is dispersed and spread apart. What's empirically true about the Jews is our instinct to spread apart. It's oftentimes only our enemies who can see us as a collective in ways that transcend what we can actually see. And when we look at some of the paradoxes of even the last couple of centuries, within a century of one another was the great possibility of emancipation, the story that Jews could be thriving full citizens of whatever societies in which we chose to live, and within the same century, the birth of Zionism, the belief that emancipation couldn't work. We as American Jews are probably the best experiment so far about the possibility of emancipation, Jewish at-homeness and political power, at the same time as the radical success of Jewish sovereignty and self-determination in our lifetime. The two greatest stories, greatest success stories politically and otherwise, of Jewish history have happened at the same time. They have reinforced each other. They have been codependent. But it's increasingly not obvious to us whether they actually remain dependent on one another. And we find one of the most remarkable turns of events in Jewish history, which is that in the span of 2 generations, the state of Israel goes from being the strongest organizing force for American Jewry to its strongest disorganizing force. Sometimes I wonder whether, though we tend to talk about our own time as though we are supposed to be correcting the mistakes to return to an earlier time, I wonder whether, and I learned this from my colleague Noam Pianko, I think is here and teaching today. Noam has a great thesis which says, and I think he's right, that the exceptional moment of Jewish history was actually the 20th century and not the 21st. The period of Jewish solidarity in the middle of the 20th century when the Jewish people have a clear shared project and a clear sense of urgency based on the dislocations and disruptions of the 20th century to collectively be involved in the shared enterprise of Jewish peoplehood and building the state of Israel. And that what we are experiencing today is not a deviation from the norm, but effectively a return to the norm. And it's happening under remarkable conditions. If the 20th century for the Jewish people involved the search for homeness, we in the 21st century are facing significant challenges trying to figure out what it means for the Jewish people actually to be at home. That's for us as American Jews to wrestle with the consequences of unprecedented affluence, influence, power, and privilege, and for Israelis to reckon with the challenge of being in charge of a sovereign Jewish civilization for the first time in 2,000 years. These are the gifts of problems. Would that most Jews in Jewish history face these challenges, and what we are experiencing, therefore, is a kind of return to the paradoxes. We can play out all of the different versions of the different sides of these paradoxes that we have lived with in defining Judaism and Jewish history throughout our times. But even if this is a return to the normal, even if we are reverting to the mean, it still takes a little getting used to, especially for those of us who grew up with or inherited a vision of Zionism as a source of solidarity for the Jewish people as opposed to a site of division. And there may be pieces of what has been lost that are worth fighting for. The Jewish people are a people whose primary vehicles that we have used to carry ourselves through history have been the quality of our ideas. And what is going to drive us to be able to wrestle with and reckon with the challenges that we face is the capacity to articulate new visions and versions of how we can move from this period in Jewish history into the next. To do so and to launch this conversation, I'm honored and thrilled to invite back to the stage Tzipi Livni together with, as I alluded to before, 2 of the great titans of Jewish and Israeli intellectual history and thought, Professor Ruth Gavison and Rabbi Dr. Yitz Greenberg, to respond to this conversation.